This is part 2 of the IRR and McKinsey crap video. I hope they don't put a gun against me or anything else. But I'm going to start this video just talking about the directions and the influence of the cost of capital in the IRR. Now, before I do this, I've got to find a little quote. Okay. Here. You might, here's, I said this, you might say that, you know, when I put a discount rate in that I'm just going to put in the middle, in the middle. What does this discount rate represent? Well, if it's the rate you can magically find to invest in other kind of assets, well, that MIR mechanically is correct. There's no question it's mechanically correct. But our friends at McKinsey said most practitioners would agree that a company's cost of capital, by definition, the return, they should have said the minimum return, those idiots, the return available elsewhere to its shareholders on a similarly risky investment, minimum return, is a clearer and more logical rate to assume for reinvestments of interim project cash flows, close quotation marks. So we're going to say, they say the discount rate or the reinvestment rate you should use is the minimum return. Now I have a couple of examples where in this case, with some cash flows, you increase the cost of capital, and this MIR goes up. It always goes closer to the cost of capital. So if the cost of capital is 30, or reinvestment rate is 30, it's higher. If it's lower, it's lower. The WROI, as long as the rate of return is increasing over time, it will place less weight on the really high returns in the later years. The IRR, of course, has no effect. Now, if we, I'm going back to our little example here. And the way I left off, I made a much simpler minus 160 and 60 example. Of course, I've got too much crap over here. Maybe I should take this away. Rows, right? Okay, rows. I'm just pressing Shift Alt left arrow if you really care. Okay. So then we have a little data table at the bottom, and this data table, what happens here, in this case, the ROIC goes up. And if the ROIC goes up, we're going to put less weight on this higher 20% with a higher cost of capital. That's all we do with cost of capital. So when we increase the cost of capital with the weighted ROIC, I should have clicked on this Shift Alt right arrow, and then we get a lower return with a higher cost of capital. If we do the opposite, if we use the MIR, we get a higher return with a higher reinvestment rate. And in fact, here's my big criticism and why I don't think anybody uses the MIRs, because, oh, okay, we want a higher one, we just put a higher rate in, and it just brings us closer to the rate. It doesn't really measure anything at all. Okay, and then the level is kind of meaningless. We just showed you that last time, I hope. Okay, so now let's move to valuation. Now in our really the example I used last time, and this is what I want to show you, what this whole weighted return on investment really does. When you, in this example, I have a 10%, and I have our very extreme cash flows with a really high middle period cash flows. The NPV of our cash flow is really positive at 10%. It's just taking the NPV of all these numbers. I didn't put the D's and the 1s. Sorry about that, and I'm not going to change it. And we have our same IRR, MIRR, and now I put the WROIC here as our three kind of statistics. And I'm going to show you how you can get this same NPV of cash flow, how the weighted return produces that value in kind of a different way. Now, I hope you remember that this had minus 100, positive 160, positive 70. This time, I'm going to take this return and I'm going to assume, in a very simple way, this return is earned the same. It's the same return for every single year. If this was a 20-year investment, we take this and assume exactly the same return is earned on your investment every year. And no fancy stuff. You take this return, multiply it by the investment balance. And then you get the income, which is just 100 times 88. 50 times 88 is about 44. I think I can almost get that. To get cash flow, we have to add the depreciation back. And then we get our total cash flow. Now, this total cash flow is different than this cash flow up here. But when you, and I should be more elegant at proving the mathematics of all this, when you take the present value of this cash flow at 10%, I put the 10% here, and I took NPV of this number, I get exactly our same 93.91. 93.91. Let me kind of repeat, because this is an important idea. This is what the weighted average ROIC does. It allows you to take any kind of investment, any company that you compute the ROIC for, this ROIC that you computed, when you use this in a calculation, when you use this in a calculation and multiply it by the investment balance, no PVing or present value or anything else, this times this investment balance gives you an income. Add that to depreciation, get a different cash flow. NPV of that cash flow is exactly the same as the NPV. That's, I think, going to be pretty obvious now that this our weighted average ROIC will give you exactly the same ranking, and it will give you exactly the same metrics, and it will perform exactly the same as the NPV, the theoretically correct NPV calculation itself. Let's just do it here. Let's just do one more thing, and then I'll stop for you. Okay, now I've got this somewhere. I'm gonna put this back, so it's a little spinner box if you care. I'm not gonna go through that. I'm gonna make, first of all, the cost of capital. I hope I didn't use weighted average cost of capital too much. The cost of capital here is 13.07, and if it's 13.07, we get an NPV of 0. And actually, the IRR and everything else would be working. Everything would work fine when the cost of capital is the same. But so does, in this case, where am I? I'm here. Okay, I'm here. Okay, here's the PV factor for the 2 years. Here's the weighting of the investment after we account for both the investment value and the PV factor, and then we get the ROIC, which goes up over time. So our weighted average ROIC is there. And the more important thing is that if you use this ROIC, multiply it by the investment balance, get the income here, and subtract the investment balance, we get this set of cash flows. Very different. Minus 163.56. Very different than the minus 160.60. But when we do that, we get an NPV of 0. This cash flow produces the same NPV as the original one. That's kind of the little bit of mathematical tricks. And how much do I have to say? Repeat. Sorry, but this is I think I'm being arrogant. What the hell? I'm being arrogant. I think this weighted average ROIC is a really big deal because it fixes these IRR problems. It gives you an indication without this horrible reinvestment rate that's in the IRR. I agree that's a problem, but the MIR doesn't solve it, and this really does solve it. It makes everything consistent with NPV. So that's part 2 of the video. Part 3 and the next one is going to show you how to um, some examples of ranking investments and how the. Did you call me a jerk? They call me a jerk for making a video. Well, maybe I am a jerk. Bye.